All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started in about a minute or two. I just wanted to wish you all, happy Tuesday. We've made it through, well, not made it through another week, but we're almost halfway through with another week. So just a real quick thing for anyone who doesn't know, we're Doc365. We host a weekly webinar on a variety of different topics. Every other week, we do what's called the SharePoint Basics series. So this is the next iteration of that. But basically, we cover different SharePoint topics, and we basically provide a high-level overview of that topic. We show you how to do specific things within SharePoint. We've covered how to do term store management. We've covered how to do project sites, team sites, communication sites. Actually, project sites are upcoming. But basically, if you would like to go find that, you can go find all of those on our website, mydoc365.com/webinars. You can access any of the recordings for free. I see now that it is 11 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So hello there. My name is Quentin Russell. I'm the content marketing specialist here at Doc365, and today we're going to be presenting the next part of our SharePoint Basics series. This time it's on governance. This is kind of a departure from our normal SharePoint Basics series. Usually what I'd be doing is I'd be explaining a concept to you guys and then going into a live SharePoint environment to show you how to do these step-by-step parts of the process. Governance is not exactly a step-by-step process, something I can show you within 30 to 40 minutes. However, what I can do is I can explain to you what governance is. I can explain to you why you're going to need governance. And then I can basically walk you through how to build a basic governance plan. Because the thing is SharePoint, especially new adoptees of SharePoint and Office 365, your environment, your tenant can kind of become like the Wild West. There's no real rules. No one knows what they're doing, and everyone's kind of just making it up as they go along. And, 6 months in, you look at everything and you see it's a complete and utter mess. And you think to yourself, well, why did we even invest in SharePoint and Office 365 in the first place? So what we're looking to do with this part of the SharePoint Basics series is to help you avoid a lot of that and, create a plan that you can use to go back in and fix anything if anything's gone wrong, like I described. So before we get started, we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, I'm going to do a quick 2 to 3 minute thing on who we are at Doc365. Then we're going to cover what SharePoint governance is. We're going to describe, what goes into it and what needs to be part of it. Then we're going to talk about why you need SharePoint governance. So specific reasons and situations that can negatively impact your company over time. After that, we'll be covering how to build and implement a governance plan in your organization. That'll also include things you need to watch out for, things you need to be thinking about as you build your governance plan. Finally, at the end of the webinar, we'll be doing a question and answer session. So how we're going to be handling that is if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat. At the end of the webinar during that session, I will then try to answer any of the questions that you have. I'll go through in chronological order. If there's anything I cannot answer during this webinar, I will do the research, find it out, and then add it to the webinar recording email that you will be receiving later today. So you'll be able to access that completely for free. I'll make sure to go as in-depth as I can so that I can make sure that you have all your questions about SharePoint governance answered. Because above all else, here at Doc365, we're committed to making sure that businesses have the tools, resources, and knowledge that they need to really reshape how they work. So with that said, who we are, Doc365. So we're a company located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have over 17 years of experience working with SharePoint to deliver exceptional productivity solutions. We've worked with a wide range of companies in a variety of industries to implement a diverse array of SharePoint productivity tools. These include intranet portals, contract management systems, CRM solutions. We've recently launched a new safety, quality, and risk management system called SafePoint. We'd love to have a conversation with you about that. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me after the webinar or go over to our website, head on over to the product pages and check those out. Overall, our mission is to help you break down silos and really get your employees to engage and collaborate with one another. That's our utmost, like that's why we do what we do. Because a lot of times with companies, they run into situations where you have people who've been working there for years. They're great workers, hard workers, they've acquired a ton of knowledge, but whether it's because they don't think to, or, you know, the unthinkable, which is that they don't want to, they don't share a lot of the accumulated knowledge, the experience that they have with one another. So you have these well springs of information, these great fonts of knowledge about your company, about your business, about your work. And no one in the company is really able to access them except that individual person, whether that's because of poor communication, a lack of resources, whatever. Our goal is to provide you with tools that can really break down those walls and get everyone to engage and collaborate with one another in a kind of meaningful manner so that you can really do what you're doing, but better. So, on to why you guys are here. What is SharePoint governance? Basically, SharePoint governance is your company's defined policies, roles, responsibilities, and processes for how people are using SharePoint. Basically, it is a top-down user manual for what people can and can't do in your SharePoint environment. That's pretty self-explanatory. I don't really have to go in depth there. It's basic. It's the law. You build a governance plan, you enact governance in your organization, and you say, this is how it is. And when people deviate out of that, you hold them accountable and you correct the problem. You go in and you delete anything that was added erroneously or re-add anything that might have been deleted wrongly. Basically, it's, you know, you have your business, you have a business plan. You have how you do things in your organization. You have how you do things, how your employees are supposed to communicate with one another, who's reporting to who's responsible for what. All of these are written down. SharePoint governance is basically just doing that, but for Office 365 and SharePoint. I mean, it's pretty simple. You have rules of engagement for the office. You have rules of engagement for remote working. Why not have it for the central platform that you're using every day to store and manage your documents? And more, depending on what you're using SharePoint for. So there's three main components to SharePoint governance. The first one is your governance plan. This is essentially the formal document that serves as an official guideline for governance. Basically, like I said, it's the do's and don'ts of your SharePoint environment. This can be as complicated or simple as it gets. Basically, however much you're using SharePoint is however long your governance plan needs to be. If you're only using SharePoint to store documents, which is kind of a waste of SharePoint if you're not using it for everything, but I digress. If you're just using it to store documents, then you really only need a plan that refers to document storage. If you're using it for collaboration, if you're using it for contract management, safety management, if you're using it for learning, training, all of that's, type of activities, then you need to have plans that pertain to those activities as well. It's pretty simple. There are a lot of really good governance templates out there, but really just a Word document that just has, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, can suffice, especially for smaller organizations. So the next part of governance, and one of the key components, is a governance committee. This is essentially a group of users in your organization that meet regularly to set, modify, and discuss different SharePoint policies, issues, feedbacks, improvements, or updates. Basically, if Microsoft rolls out a new update that changes the functionality of something or adds a new feature, that committee would then meet to determine how your organization is going to use that, how they're going to use that feature, and what are the rules surrounding that feature. There are other situations where, hey, something goes wrong, something crashed. That's the group that meets to figure out how you're going to avoid that in the future. Generally, the composition of this shouldn't just be managers, CEOs, vice presidents, and all of that. It shouldn't just be the higher up people in your organization. It should be a nice mix of regular users, IT, and the higher ups. Because the thing is everyone uses SharePoint differently, and everyone has different responsibilities within SharePoint. So something that might work for one group of users might not be effective or could even add extra work to another group of users. So having that nice mix, having a nice representative body that can voice the concerns for all different types of people within your organization for how you're using SharePoint can really ensure that that everyone is getting the most out of SharePoint and that you're really getting the most out of your Office 365 and SharePoint investment. Because if people are struggling to use it, they're just not going to. They're going to switch back to using Google Documents. They're going to keep everything in their computer. They're going to store things just in their email inbox because, some people just forget to save things. If you have a governance plan headed by a governance committee that is committed to making sure that everyone has that voice, that that it works for everyone, you can have that kind of centralized, unified, way of doing things so that nothing gets lost. People aren't sure of what they need to be doing, and you can just really get to work without any worries. Finally, the third one is user communication. This is important. Basically, your organization needs to be soliciting constant feedback from your users on what's going on with the governance plan, how they are feeling about the SharePoint environment, how they're feeling about the use of SharePoint, just all of these different touch points where you can say, okay, where are the pain points, what's working, what isn't, what can we do to improve things over the next 6 months? That's pretty simple. It kind of goes along with the governance committee, but the governance committee is generally going to meet more regularly. We recommend something about bi-weekly, so about 2 to 3 times a month, depending on. But user communication, generally do it about once a month you can get away with once a quarter, especially if you're a smaller organization. But the larger your organization, the more you're using SharePoint, the more often you're going to want to touch base with your users so that you can see what's going on. SharePoint actually offers a ton of ways to build and distribute surveys to your users so that you can get just quick little 5-minute touch bases and compile all that information in a way that you can view it and read it, from the top down. Of course, that is a bit more of an advanced functionality. There are ways to build it out, but generally, that's going to be kind of a more intermediate to advanced thing. So yeah, those are the components of governance. So why do you need SharePoint governance? Well, one of the first reasons you definitely need SharePoint governance is that as your organization exists, as you do work over the years, you generally produce a lot of content. And if you're using SharePoint from the moment your company is founded, 2 years in, you're going to have 2 years worth of documents, files, and information that you need to keep track of. So generally, you're going to run into and over that time, you're going to run into situations where if you don't have a plan, users are going to be generating their own sites, libraries, lists, and applications without any guidance. So you're going to have just a ton of stuff scattered everywhere. Basically, having all of that superfluous content spread out everywhere is going to, come back to bite you. While SharePoint does offer a lot of storage space, it's about 1 terabyte plus a certain amount per how many users you have. I don't remember that off the top of my head. However, we do have a webinar on storage within SharePoint and online and how to really manage that. If you want to go back and check that out, again, you can go to our website, mydoc365.com/webinars. If you scroll down, you can find that webinar. However, that's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about having too much content and not really knowing what to do and basically preventing that content buildup. Governance can help you with that. Basically, by having those rules, by having those, strictures in place, you can ensure that people aren't going to be, building out a new site every time they're trying to do something. Or if they are building out a new site, it's according to your governance plan. Another situation you can run into is organizational conflict. Just like any organization struggles when people don't know who they're supposed to be reporting to, when the org chart is very unclear, the same thing happens within SharePoint Online. No one knows who's responsible for doing what. So, you have to spend a ton of time asking around and being like, okay, who can approve this? Who's allowed to build sites? Who can do this? Who can do that? And it just grinds your progress to a halt. I mean, seriously, when no one knows who has the permissions to delete things, when no one knows who has the permissions to, access certain documents and grant those permissions, like I was saying, it just creates a ton of operational inefficiency, which kind of goes down what we're talking about at the bottom. It's almost like a lot of these overlap with one another, which basically it is, because everything is a lot of the issues that spring up from SharePoint governance are, it's not just distinct issues. They tend to bleed over, they blend with one another, and they can cause each other to get worse. I mean, if you have too much content, it creates operational inefficiency because people are having to sort through all of these different documents, having to go, okay, click, click, click. I can't find it. I'm scrolling through this document library. I know it has it. I can't find it. Maybe it's not titled the right way. No one knows what's going on. And again, it just grinds you to a halt. Another situation that that shows why you need SharePoint governance is shoddy adoption. This is a situation where users aren't actually using SharePoint. They're relying on Google Drive. They're using their personal OneDrive. They're storing everything on their computer. And basically, instead of having all of your information and files and documents in one place, like that's the purpose of SharePoint, is to do that, to make it so you can have all of that in one place, share, manage, and collaborate with one another. Instead, it's all spread out. No one knows where it is. It's on a ton of different documents, and you run into a situation where less than half your workforce is actually using SharePoint. So why are you using SharePoint? You're giving Microsoft all this money, but you're not actually getting anything out of your investment, and that's just a waste of money, and that's hurting your bottom line. Another situation you can run into that shows why you need SharePoint governance is IT overload. If issues keep popping up in your SharePoint environment, people keep deleting things, people keep adding things, they make changes, and it causes major issues because you don't have your permissions set up properly. People are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, but they don't know. Whoever's responsible for maintaining your SharePoint environment, whether that's one IT person, your IT department, or certain individuals in your organization who that's not legitimately their job, but it's kind of fallen on them, they can't do their normal job. They can't do their normal work. And instead they're having to run around, put out fires everywhere. And that can cause long-term problems in your SharePoint environment because they're not doing what they have to be doing to maintain everything. So as their work piles up and as they're not able to make the small behind-the-scenes changes that they need to make, those will begin to pile up over time, and eventually they're just burned out, frustrated, and they're not going to be able to do what they need to do to keep your SharePoint environment running. I touched on this earlier, but the next one is operational inefficiency. Basically, this is also just poorly designed SharePoint architecture. So, it's difficult to navigate around. The aesthetic is awful. The colors are garish, so they don't match. And it causes issues where people can't find what they're looking for because, something was in this place on this page, but it's actually here on this site. And it's just a mess because there's nothing consistent. People have to go and search. They have to take time to go scroll through, sift through each page. And it's just a nightmare. Like, it legitimately is. We have a lot of customers who come to us with these issues. And one of the things that they just really talk about is having all their SharePoint, SharePoint's great, but the problem is that people are using it in a way that just breaks it. Because it's like Legos, honestly. My favorite way to describe SharePoint in Office 365 is that it's like Legos. If you follow the rules, if you follow the directions, it's gonna come out perfectly. Unless you're missing a piece or something because something went wrong along the way on Microsoft's end. Unless that happens, you're going to have by following the rules, by following the directions for whatever your play set is, it's going to work, it's going to function. But if you're just building, whatever you want and everyone's building whatever they want, you run into situations where, things don't look right. No one can find the right piece that they're looking for. And stuff is overlapping and, causing problems for the other designs and builds. So yeah, operational inefficiency. It can be a major problem. And then finally, risk of downtime. This is mostly for when things go catastrophically wrong with your SharePoint environment. But basically, if people aren't able to work, you're not being productive. You're not making money. Like, at the end of the day, That's just what it comes down to. If your SharePoint's down, if people can't use it, if people can't access what they're looking for, they're not doing their jobs. Your bottom line's getting hurt. So yeah. Now to kind of move away from the doom and gloom of things, here are 3 major benefits of building a governance plan. So the first one is that a governance plan allows you to build for growth, and it scales easily. Basically, it allows you to plan for new users coming in so you can better accommodate them. Everyone knows what they can and can't do. So they'll be able to jump into the environment comfortably, and they'll have those defined boundaries that they can brush up on, so they can they know how much leeway they have, and then they can run with it. But not only that, a governance plan also has training built into it, or at least it should have training built into it. So by having that training in there, people know in order to even access your SharePoint environment, they have to go through a certain amount of training. So then they can just jump in once they've been trained and say, okay, I know what I'm doing. I'm good to go. We don't have to spend a week trying to fix mistakes that this new guy made because he didn't know what he was doing. Moving on to user adoption. A governance plan is accountability. It says, okay, this is how you're supposed to use SharePoint, and this is you're using SharePoint. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if people aren't using SharePoint, then you can point at your governance plan, say, this is an official company policy. You are supposed to be using SharePoint. You are not supposed to be storing things in a Google Drive. So this is an official warning, and you need to do better next time. And if they continue to not follow the governance plan, you basically have a path that says, okay, you're not following the governance plan. Here's the punishment. Because unfortunately, that is going to happen. People aren't going to be doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're going to say, okay, well, I prefer Google Drive. I prefer to keep things in my OneDrive. But at the end of the day, that doesn't fly if you want to have a unified, cohesive SharePoint environment that benefits your company. And then finally, quality standards. Basically, you want to have a consistent level of quality throughout your SharePoint. Not only from a operational standpoint of saying, okay, everything, when you go to this site, people know what's going to be here, 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 and here. But also from just an aesthetically pleasing standpoint, because no one wants to jump into a site that is just the complete wrong colors. There's like neon green, puke yellow, whatever it is. Because, people get creative. People want to put their own spin on things. But realistically, you want to have your company branding all over your SharePoint environment. Because there's a fun thing that actually studies have shown that the more branded tools you use in your SharePoint environment, the more you're able to get people to actually engage with both whatever tools you're using, but also your company as a whole. Because they're constantly being exposed to your company, who you are, your design, your aesthetic, and they kind of internalize that over time, especially as they use it over the course of 6 months to a year. So that's just a fun little tidbit that, it's kind of one of the smaller benefit of governance, but it's still a good one for your organization. So here are the 8 things you need to think about when building a governance plan. So realistically, this is kind of how you're going to want to do a breakdown of it. So you want to have these 8 tabs in there. You can have more tabs depending on how you're using SharePoint. So if you're using it for contract management, you'd add a contract management tab. But essentially, this is the outline. So with architecture, what you want to, first of all, you want to think about architecture. So generally, there are 2 ways you can really build out a SharePoint environment. You can go tall, which Microsoft does not recommend. And so that's having sites and then subsites and then subsites, subsites, subsites. And that's how people will navigate into that. So they'll go to the main site and they'll say, okay, I want to go to this site, and then that site will take me to this site. So essentially think about it like, okay, so this is the company's SharePoint site. Okay, I want to go to the marketing department's SharePoint site. And then from the marketing department SharePoint site, I want to go into this team's marketing, subsite. And then from this subsite, I want to go into this specific project for this specific team. And basically it's nested. You can't get to this final one, this final project from the main site. But really, Microsoft does not recommend that. They actually recommend setting it up horizontally. So basically just don't use subsites. Generally just use sites for specific purposes. And if you are like, and if you need something new, if you need new sites, it's better to just build wholly new sites, provide links to them from the main site as a sort of hub site, and then just archive sites as you're not using them. But this architecture also relates to how you're going to have your library set up, how you're going to have your list set up. So what metadata columns you're using to sort your information. What are you going to be using folders? Are you going to be using subfolders? How that's all going to be set up and how that information is going to be stored in there. The next tab you need to think about is security. So this is specifically pertaining to permissions and site ownership. So basically who is allowed to do what, who can access what, who is allowed to make changes, what are the responsibilities of these users as well. So you need to say, okay, like a good example of this is basically having 3 groups. You have your admins, so they have access to everything. And then you have your managers. So essentially they have approval powers, but there are certain things within the SharePoint environment they cannot do, like manage the term store or do stuff like manage tenant-wide permissions. And they can just manage these sites that they are owners of, whether those are sites or hub sites. And then finally, you just have regular users who can upload things. They can make changes on the sites that they have access to, but they don't have the ability to delete anything, create new sites. And that should be the vast majority of your users. You can segment it further than that, depending on the size of your organization and what you're doing. But that's a general good rule of thumb, is to have those 3 tiers. Navigation. So this is how your menus are going to be set up and how sites are going to be linked to one another. This overlaps with architecture, but it's more concerned with, horizontal movement. So how you're going to move from department site to department site. Are you going to have a main home page with the menu up at the top? How is that going to be set up? Can people add things to that? What is allowed to be navigated to and what is not allowed to be navigated to? Like I said, there is a lot of overlap there with architecture, and that's something that you just have to really think about and plan. So essentially, whenever you're going to build SharePoint sites, whenever you're going to build out your SharePoint environment, it's best to plan it out ahead of time. So like take a scrap of paper and say, okay, I have no idea if this is going to be reversed, so I'm just going to use boxes. But essentially you go, so here is my main site right here. So then it's going to link out to here, and this is going to link out to here, which also links back to here, which links back to here, and then this, which can also link back to here, but also link to here. And you basically just want to take a Word document, like a OneNote notebook, and really just plan out how that's going to work so that you can then build around that and have a plan for how people are going to navigate your site. And then you're also just going to want to be soliciting consistent feedback from users to say, okay, well, how easy is it to find things? Are you able to navigate this site? Are you able to get to where you want to go? Another thing you want to talk about is your branding. So again, like I touched on a bit earlier, what colors are you using on your site? What is the language that is allowed to be used for things like public facing content if you're doing communication sites to present things to third parties? What are acceptable designs for sites? This is just the kind of, like, this is a smaller section, but it is important. And because it really captures the feel and look and operation of your SharePoint site. The next thing you want to talk about is your metadata. So how are you tagging things? What what tags are you using? And, what are people allowed to add tags? Do they have to use a prescribed set of tags? Basically this is just how your information is going to be organized and sorted. We went more in depth on that about 2 weeks ago. We did a SharePoint Basics series on term store management. So if you have questions about that, you want to see that, make sure to go over to our website, mydoc365.com/webinars. Like I've been saying, just go find that one. You can get the recording for free. We go really in depth on term store management and what you can do to really, because For those of you who don't know, term store management is essentially just managed metadata. You're setting up the metadata tags that people can use in your organization from a top-down level. You can build metadata, organically just by adding it to a document, but we really recommend building out your term store and then having people work from that. The next thing that you want to think about is your retention policies. So when are things going to be deleted? How long are you going to if a document hasn't been touched in a year, should you delete it? Yes or no? What documents are kept? How are you going to archive information? What are you doing when you no longer need a file? What happens to sites that are, were going to be built out but aren't? All of those are important questions that you need to ask yourself. You can actually set up retention policies within SharePoint. We do talk about that in a SharePoint Basics series on managing storage. So again, you can go find that on our website. So yeah, that's something important to think about. Another thing that you want to think about is your integrations. So what can users add to SharePoint sites? SharePoint has a ton of third-party integrations that you can add. Unfortunately, those are third parties that are accessing the data within your SharePoint environment. So you really need to think about what you're adding, when you're adding it, why you're adding it, and you need to have a process for that. Users shouldn't be able to just add it all willy-nilly. There should be a process that they have to go through to say, okay, well, I need this tool. I'd like to use this through single sign-on and not have to jump around to a bunch of different things. So basically, you need to have a process in place for both dealing with that and also for vetting new integrations that people want to add. And then finally, you want to have training. You need to have a plan in place to train users in how to use your SharePoint environment. Basically, you need to think about things like, what topics do they need to know? What do they need to know to be able to do? And then how long are they supposed to go through the training? So is there a waiting period? Do you have a kiddie pool area that they can play around with and mess with so they can learn things? That really depends on what you're doing with SharePoint. If you're just using documents, if you're just using it for document storage, just a quick primer can do it. But if you're using a full intranet, contract management, project management, more in-depth tools that are built out, like some of the ones that Doc 365 does, that is something that you should really think about and expand upon. So basically because of that, there are about 7 key components to a governance plan. So first of all, you need to think about authority. So what are site owners allowed to do? Next up, you need to think about site hierarchy. So again, thinking about whether it's going to be, horizontal, whether it's horizontal or vertical. Next, you need to do security and permissions. So, what are people allowed to do? What are they not allowed to do? Next up is navigation convention. So basically, do you have a navigation plan planned out, or do you just have a guideline for what you're doing with navigation? So people can expand upon the navigation. It just has to follow a certain amount, like a certain stricture. Next up is sharing guidelines. So this is really important. It's not just sharing within your organization, but it's also third-party sharing, because your data is important, and it's really bad if a bad actor, either inside or outside your organization, gets access to your document and leaks it to people who can potentially hurt you, such as competitors or malicious third/fourth parties. Next up is an escalation map. Basically, you need to plan out for at least 6 months of growth. You do need to know how your organization is going to grow people-wise. But essentially, you need to kind of have an overall map that shows you where you're going to be going with SharePoint, how it's going to grow, what you're expanding out into. And then finally, third-party resources. If you do decide to allow integrations into your SharePoint environment, you need to have a defined list of third-party tools that are allowed in. And then you also need to have that defined process for how the list can be expanded. So, just some things to consider about, a SharePoint governance plan. First of all, and I can't stress this enough, it's adoption. It doesn't matter what your SharePoint environment is, how basic it is. We've had people come to us and they've said, wow, we like SharePoint. It's good. The people just aren't using it. People aren't using it. So, it's a waste of time. I don't know what I'm doing. And then we've helped them. We've built out their SharePoint environment to, use specific things. And as people were using the SharePoint tools that we built for them, people began to use it more. They began to adopt it, and suddenly they were getting they were getting what they were investing into SharePoint. They were maximizing their investment, and they weren't wasting money anymore. So that's important to think about. You can have the tool, but if you can't, it's like the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can have the tool, but if people don't use it, it's going to be worthless and not do anything for your company. Next up, you need to think about scalability. So something that might work for you now, processes that are good now, might not work for you 6 months to a year from now. And so that kind of goes back to that growth map. You need to be thinking about the future. You need to be thinking about growth, because no company plans to get smaller. No company plans to fail. So you need to have something in place that says, okay, what are we going to do if we double our workforce? What are we going to do if we increase our workforce by, double is a bit presumptuous, but what if we do in like the next 6 months, we increase our workforce by 20%, 10%, 15%. Those are questions that you need to ask yourself and things you need to plan for. Next up is feedback. You need to be soliciting feedback constantly. Depending on the size of your SharePoint environment, what you're using it for. Again, like I said, you don't need to get it as often, but basically, it's pretty consistent. If you're using it every day, if you're doing a lot of complicated stuff with it, if you have a lot going on, you need to be asking people how they're using it, when they're using it, what's going on, what are the pain points, just all of that information so that you can know how to orient your SharePoint environment in a way that it works for them. And then finally, training. We talk about needing training, but you need to think about what training they need. Because again, like I said, depending on what you're using it for, you might not need as much training. But at the end of the day, you still need training, not only to teach people how to use SharePoint, because some people can be massively technical, jump in, pick it up, be good to go. And other people can't have a technical bone in their body. But basically, no matter what, you just need to have some form of training that matches the way you're using SharePoint. And, because you've been staring at a PowerPoint for so long, this isn't going to be like a major, wow, that is a lot going on at once. But basically, what we're going to do really quick is we're going to show you what a SharePoint environment could look like that is, that has a strict governance plan. Right now, we're going to take a look at our contract management system. Like I said, I'm not trying to really sell you anything right now. It'd be great if you did, if you were interested in it. But basically, this is what a SharePoint environment that, has a strict governance plan, has a strict, this is what people are allowed to do, this is what they're not allowed to do, built within here. With our contract management system, we build out a lot of that information in there for you. So you don't have to plan, because users are automatically gated off based off permission levels, which would be defined by a governance plan. But basically, this right here, you can, if you were to say adopt our contract management system, or if you were to build out your SharePoint environment in a way that kind of matched that, that would be something that would really benefit your company. And, well, sorry about this. Anyway, so, but also taking a look at like our intranet and everything, like our main intranet, which is kind of more applicable to what you'd be doing with SharePoint, and trying to make it that kind of centralized, unified environment that people can use for like document storage, doing it for, building wikis, employee directories, whatever, to have that organization, to have the environment that they're using every day. Because the truth, like, with a governance plan, if you're just using basic SharePoint, you just need like a 1 or 2 page document that kind of defines things. But if you're using something like this, you are going to need to have a broader governance plan. Fortunately, if you were to use our intranet, again, a lot of that is built into the actual intranet's infrastructure. So as you can see, this is, our plan denotes how how the menu works, where people can navigate to, what people can and can't do. This is an admin level, but we do have permissions built out for the company itself. So there are different users of different levels already built in. So yeah, that's what that's what our contract management system looks like. That's what our intranet looks like. Both of these are built with a full governance plan in mind. So you don't really need to think about that. And we can kind of take away a lot of the concerns that you might have, a lot of the time that you might have to spend building out a full governance plan. 1 second, did it? Yeah, it shared. Okay. So again, if you are interested in either of those systems or any of our other productivity tools, you feel free to reach out to us either after the webinar or, go to our website, go to the product pages, fill out a demo. It's just a quick 30 to 45-minute thing. There's no obligation. We're not going to like bombard you or hound you or, knock on your door and tell you that, it's time to buy. We just want to, help you reshape how you're working. So yeah. That is the webinar. Does anyone have any questions? While people are, if anyone has any questions, feel free to think of them for the next minute or so. I do want to talk to you about any upcoming webinars that we have. So next week, we're going on the 23rd. We're going to be talking about the differences between Office 365 and Google Drive, what you need to buy. So basically determining what works best for what companies and which you should choose and why. After that, on March 2nd, we'll be covering indexing and crawling. So basically how to set up your SharePoint environment in a way that best allows content to be searched for. After that, on March 9th, we'll be covering custom versus package software. So again, what to choose and why. So covering the pros and cons of each and kind of figuring out a definitive which would work best for your organization. And then finally on March 16th, we'll be covering project sites within SharePoint Online. That'll be the kind of conclusion of our basic site series. So we've already covered team sites, hub sites, and communication sites. So we'll be finishing out with project sites. And then after that, we will be doing more webinars because like I said, we do a webinar every week, alternating between a more business-minded webinar and then a SharePoint Basics webinar. So yeah, feel free to contact us. Our phone number is 904-309-9970. You can reach out to us at info@mydoc365.com, or you can reach out to me personally if you have any questions at qrussell@mydoc365.com. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. We're Doc365. This has been Quentin Russell, the content marketing specialist here at Doc365. This has been the SharePoint Basics series on governance. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thank you very much for coming out.